Folks, welcome to the Rotoworld Football Show. I am your host today, Denny Carter. I am joined by my favorite Zoomer on planet Earth, Kyle Dvorchak. Pat Doherty is not with us today because he's busy, Kyle, pretending not to be a Disney guy while at Disney World with his beautiful family, of course. Do we think that Pat actually becomes a Disney guy when he comes back from this trip?
We will never know is the thing, because what is he going to do? Tell you oh yeah, I love all the magic and the theater and everything. No, he's going to tell us he hated it. He's like, oh my God, it was so much walking and the kids were so much to manage. He'll concede a little bit, but he'll never admit to being a Disney guy, albeit I think it's entirely possible he does come back filled with wonder and all the whimsy that comes with going to Disney. He wouldn't, I wouldn't admit it. You can tell it kind of sounds like I might have gone once. So
I went once when I was 11. It was a much different place back then. So I'm not a Disney dad because I haven't been there since then. That was 1994. So it has been a while. Kyle has never heard of 1994. But Pat, last time the Doherty clan went to Disney World, he came back and we were talking on the phone and he goes, I have to tell you something. And I'm like, oh, is this serious? He's like, I really enjoyed Disney World.
What did I tell you? You'd be embarrassed to admit it. I knew it. I went 2 or 3 years ago and I liked it a lot. I went with a Disney adult friend who, one, did an incredible job making sure we saw everything Disney had to offer, which I'm very appreciative. And two, we averaged 13 miles a day. We were doing half marathons every day. My feet hurt so bad.
13 miles.
I swear to God, yeah. I think we had 2 days where we got over 12. I think maybe we came just shy of 13, and we were there for 3 or 4 days. It was Again, though, Disney is an experience, and I want to go there and experience all the things. I appreciate it. There's just a lot to experience, but it is. I'd go back.
I did go to Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios about 15 years ago, and that was incredible. So I will say that. All right, for today's show. Before I ask Kyle a question about baseball, because we got to visit that in a second. But for today's show, we have a bunch of free agency stuff lined up, along with draft content. We have Cooper Kupp signing with the Seahawks. We have Jordan Mason ending up in Minnesota somehow. We have the Chiefs re-signing Kareem Hunt, what that might mean for the Kansas City backfield. We have the Raiders maybe targeting Stefon Diggs in the coming weeks. And we have Ted McMillan's Pro Day performance. I'm going to ask Kyle all about that. But before we do that, I have to say I made a mistake on the internet the other day, and I proposed, just humbly, by the way. I didn't say I know it all, but I proposed we shorten the MLB season, okay? Because it's just too long. 162 games, too long. So I said, and this may have been too extreme, Kyle, I will admit. I said, let's make it 50 games. And people didn't like that. In fact, they freaked out. And people would say, you don't understand baseball. That's what that means. And first of all, I grew up watching baseball. I don't watch it anymore, but I used to love it as a kid. You don't understand baseball because it's not about the game. That's a weird thing to say. It's not about the game. It's about, and this is a direct quote from somebody, I'm guessing much younger than me, and I want to get your take on it. Baseball is about the, quote, immaculate vibes. And so I need to know, what does that mean? And does baseball have immaculate vibes?
Okay, so here's the thing. When you were prefacing your quote, I was like, no young person would say a complimentary thing of baseball. We don't like baseball. But maybe but immaculate vibes is very much no one over really my age, 27 or something, would say something like that. I would hardly say it. Maybe what they're saying is if you just shotgun spray 100, nearly 200 games across almost the entire calendar year, there are a lot of opportunities to go to games. And going to games, baseball is like an S tier going to game sport. Football is, I personally don't think football is good at all to go to. I do not enjoy going to football games mostly. Baseball, immaculate vibes at the stadium with good weather, which means half of the country doesn't ever get to have good weather at their games. I have a minor league team near me and I always have good weather. So immaculate vibes at the park. In any other circumstance, I'm not personally a baseball guy.
Okay. This makes sense. Look, I've been to Orioles games. Okay, I've been to Nationals games. I usually go when they stink, so that I can sit anywhere in the stadium, and it's nice. You have a beer, never more than 2 beers for me, and you maybe have some sunflower seeds, barbecue preferably, and you enjoy it. But watching it on TV for 162 games, I'm sorry, I can't get into that. I just can't. But I just wanted to know, and you're right. I think the vibes were about being in person. So thank
I'd
you
hope so.
for clarifying that. All right, let's get to football. Enough baseball. I know that's all I ever want to talk about is baseball, but we're gonna get into football because Kyle, you wrote a really good analysis piece on Rotoworld. Folks can check that out after the show. You have to listen to the show and then check it out. Cooper Kupp signing with the Seahawks. You broke down what that means for everyone involved. I guess I'll start, with JSN, with Jaxon Smith-Njigba. What do you think Cooper Kupp means as, I guess a main part of the Seattle offense now?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on how they plan on using both JSN and Cooper Kupp, because we've talked about it when we were picking out landing spots for Cooper Kupp. I still think he has some juice as a slot possession type of guy. I don't think he's as explosive as he used to be. I don't know if you want to line him up on the outside as much. Last year, from week 10 onwards, basically once they both returned, and then throwing out the game that Puka Nacua got ejected from, I think it was week 9, which is so tilting. Throwing out that game once they're back and playing a full complement of snaps. Cooper Kupp averaged 1.8 yards per route from the slot, which it's fine, but it's something you can work with. And especially because he was clearly not being engineered targets as his team's number one receiver, maybe that number comes up when he's actually not competing with a top 3. I kind of want to say like top 2 or 1, but I know I feel the same way. But let's just call it top 3 or top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. In Puka Nacua, Jason's good. I don't think he's particularly close to Puka Nacua, and that's a compliment for Nacua. So maybe his numbers all sort of rise as he gets the opportunity to be more involved in the offense. Even still, though, last year, week 10 onward, 1.3 yards per route run from out wide. I don't know if there's any coming back from that. He's primarily a slot receiver at this point, is how I would view him. That's all JSN is. He finished the year with 83 catches, just shy of 1,000 yards, exclusively from the slot. That's his slot numbers. He was much better, 2.7 yards per route run from week 8 onward from the slot, 1.6 worse than, Cooper Kupp's slot numbers from out wide. He never played out wide, never ever played out wide in college, doesn't do that in the NFL. He's an extremely talented slot receiver, maybe one of the best in the NFL, but he's limited. That's just is what he is, unless the Seahawks are projecting the next step. So it seems like one of these guys is frankly just the odd man out because they're not both playing from the slot every snap. I would personally, if I'm running a team, I'm like, put the young, super explosive, fun guy in the slot and let Cooper Kupp figure it out. But it really does drop the fantasy floor for a guy like JSN, who if they move him outside, even on like 40, 30% of his snaps, up to this point in his college and NFL career, those snaps are really not that valuable to him. So I think it drops the floor considerably for both of them because of how much overlap there is between what Cooper Kupp probably still brings to a team and definitely what JSN is.
My favorite thing you wrote in your piece on the Kupp signing with Seattle was the Seahawks should just let Kupp figure it out on the boundary.
I didn't know how to say, like, sorry, man, one of these guys is awesome. One of them is like a 31-year-old guy coming off of like 3 injury-plagued years.
Yeah. But so you're right in that. I mean, that's what the Rams did. The Rams abandoned this idea of Cooper Kupp as an extension of their run game, which he was, as like an unstoppable red zone force, as a guy who was, lining up in the slot at every opportunity. They found that Puka Nacua was way more efficient in every way. So they had Nacua take on that role, and they bumped Kupp out to the boundary and said, hey man, you're just gonna have to do it yourself. And a guy like Cooper Kupp, I think even at his peak, Cooper Kupp was not a guy who could simply win on the boundary. Like he's never profiled as that sort of guy. So if he maintains that role in Seattle, you're talking about a lack of easy button points, and that's what we liked about Cooper Kupp for so long. I think that's what it comes down to, honestly. Which of these guys, JSN or Kupp, is going to get the easy button PPR points underneath? Because the other guy is going to have trouble, at least is going to be volatile. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, I'd even preface it like it just wouldn't be good for the guy on the outside. Like maybe the one thing you can hang your hat on, I guess a few sort of connected points is that Cooper Kupp was still solid against man coverage last year, even in his downward trend at the end of the season. And maybe man coverage production is more sticky. It's not as prevalent in that we see a lot more zone these days, but man coverage year to year is a little more sticky in terms of how receivers perform against it. Maybe that tells us something about what he has left in the tank. And the other numbers falling down tell us about where the offense moved. Because it's not like it shouldn't be an indictment of him that the team wanted to build the entire plane out of Puka Nacua. I would want to do the same thing. And it was very good for Puka Nacua and the offense as a whole.
Right.
Maybe there's something that's pointing to that he has left in the tank. But I just don't see really, I don't think it's that likely, frankly. And I don't see the guy who isn't operating primarily out of the slot as a real legitimate fantasy option.
The one thing that I'll say about these two guys, JSN and Kupp, is that there's going to be almost no target competition besides these two pass catchers for Sam Darnold. I want to ask you about Darnold in a second here, but first I want to say that this decision by Kupp clearly was driven out of pure spite for the Rams dumping him, right? The Rams saying, okay, we're done with your services. Thank you. He had a very passive aggressive post in February saying, hey, by the way, the Rams, I guess, are done with me. They're not gonna bring me back in 2025. He had a chance to go to Jacksonville. They were very interested. They were talking with him. He knows, Liam Cohen, who is a McVay guy, a McVay disciple. I was rooting for that to happen because I think that he would have fit much better in that Jacksonville system, and the role was there, with Christian Kirk gone. I think this is the worst landing spot for him. But as far as Darnold goes, now he has Kupp and JSN. Is there a chance he has 12-team viability in fantasy leagues, or are we just writing that off right now?
Viability, sure, in that there are 12 quarterbacks that are starting, but then we get into buys, guys get banged up, guys disappoint, good matchups. But I truly do think this team is going to trend toward being a much more run-heavy team. Getting Clint Kubiak, who last year had a -5% pass rate over expected with the Saints, maybe don't treat that as gospel because the Saints had a weird year where they weren't starting their normal quarterback for the entire season. But I do think it will be a more run-heavy approach than we had last year with Ryan Grubb, who tried to let Geno just spread him and shred him, and it didn't really work for Geno. It was okay, but it definitely wasn't the intended outcome. I think we'll get a much more run-heavy approach, and I think that with that comes maybe some spiky efficiency where they get teams lulled into a sense of security with their probably pretty run-heavy approach, and then they find a matchup they can exploit, and Darnold gets to sling it. They have good protection, which for this offensive line might be a little bit rare, but in the occasions they do, Darnold can really chuck it. But I think part of masking that offensive line, masking some of the Sam Darnold, inefficiencies in his own right, is going to be a run-heavy approach. So I think it's fair to call him like a top half QB2. And that guy pops into your lineup every now and then for a 12-team league. But he's probably more so high-end waiver wire fodder than he is a guy you're drafting in your just standard home league.
That makes sense. Are we doing the Darnold JSN Kupp best ball stack? Does that do anything for you?
I like JSN, but frankly, it's the Kupp parks. I think JSN will get to man the slot for the most part. They obviously have a lot more invested in JSN being younger and a first-round pick than they do in Kupp. And so you can just leave the Kupp part off that for me.
And the only you are first and foremost anti Cooper Kupp. I know that.
Sorry.
Listen, I will say the only thing we know about Cooper Kupp in 2025 is that he is going to be active come hell or high water for those Rams games. Okay, like it doesn't matter. Like any injury that he suffered in the weeks preceding that, it doesn't matter. He's going to be active. So that's what we know.
That's a good note for when they release the schedule. Cause like, obviously you want to make sure your guys are active for the fantasy championship and the fantasy playoffs. Yeah. If he plays the Rams in one of those games, you're like, well, we can pencil that in as active. No matter what, there's a 0% chance injury keeps him off the field.
Well, we can also pencil in Jordan Mason into the Vikings offense. You like that transition? That was a Darty-esque, Rotopat-esque transition because the Vikings acquired running back Jordan Mason from the 49ers over the weekend in exchange for draft picks. Mason gets a 2-year deal worth over $7 million, fully guaranteed, with a maximum value of $12 million. Obviously, an incentive-laden deal. He arrives, in a backfield where it's really only Aaron Jones, who they brought back, kind of surprisingly, I think. I I have my own thoughts about what is likely to transpire here. How do you see Jordan Mason, Kyle, fitting into this Kevin O'Connell offense alongside Aaron Jones?
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll be exclusively an early down player. He has, I was gonna be like, I don't want to say he has no juice as a pass catcher. He was dead last in yards per out run among running backs
No,
last
he's
year. He has
real
no
bad
juice.
as a pass catcher. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't need to be kind in this sense. He doesn't have any juice as a pass catcher. I think Aaron Jones at his peak is probably more explosive, more of that change of pace back. But one, he's not nearly at his peak. In fact, he's maybe at the bottom of the valley at this point, coming off career lows in breakaway rate, a near career low in missed tackles forced and yards after contact. One thing he did do somewhat well last year was catch passes, 1.2 yards per route run, right in line with his career average. So that part of his game is held well. I think you get a pretty solid compliment in terms of what Jordan Mason brings to Aaron Jones, because not only can he handle that physical early down work, but you let Aaron Jones do the pass catching, and hopefully this keeps Aaron Jones healthy. I think that is almost certainly the operative point of this move, is not that they thought that they were getting some giant steal in Jordan Mason. They needed to add someone to take body blows away from Aaron Jones, who, not that he even misses an insane amount of games over his career over the past 4 years, he just seems to be playing hurt so often. So I think, one, I do think this is a really good landing spot for Mason as far as now he has standalone value and still has the contingent upside of if the other guy gets hurt, he can consume more touches. So I think it really works out well for him, but it makes a ton of sense for the Vikings too.
It does. I think from a real football standpoint, this makes a ton of sense. From a fantasy standpoint, it's ugly, bordering on hideous, because if Mason only gets the early down work, or like I should say, like the majority of the early down work, that's fine. But it makes him what's known as a trap back, right? He's getting a bunch of touches between the 20s. He's not seeing the high value touches necessarily, unless he is the locked in goal line guy. But you take away targets, you take away receptions from a running back, and that chops off the upside instantly. I do have some metrics on Jordan Mason that are pretty hopeful, if I can share that with the class real quick. Last year, Jordan Mason was 8th best in missed tackles forced per attempt. 37% of Jordan Mason's rushing yards last year came on explosive rushes. That was the 6th highest rate in the entire league. Somehow only Tank Bigsby had a higher rate of rush yards after contact than Mason. So I don't think it was just the Shanahan system, because, I mean, you do have to view these guys coming out of the Shanny system, through a skeptical lens sometimes. Well, was it just this really good setup that all running backs thrive in, or did they have something to do with it? I think Jordan Mason had something to do with it. I think that, like, from a real football standpoint, he makes the Vikings better on offense, but I am hesitant to go in on him in any way as long as Aaron Jones is healthy. I guess that's the bet, though. Like, if I'm gonna bet here on the Vikings backfield, which I guess I'm gonna have to, because that's how I draft teams. And the uncertainty around the backfield can suppress ADPs, and we know that, and we're gonna see that here. If I had to bet, I probably would still go with Mason, though. After all that, I still bet on Mason over Jones. Would you do the same, or would you go with Jones?
I think I would do the same too. And he does head to like a deep sprawling branch of the Shanahan tree, right? Through Kevin O'Connell, through Sean McVay, back through
Right.
Shanahan. So I think there will be some somewhat of a familiar system, a familiar look. And I assume the team that is not only paying him on this contract, but had to go out and trade draft capital assets for him, has sort of an understanding of what his strengths are and how they can match them. So I kind of agree. I want to take a bet on the younger, sort of more exciting efficiency back, even if I definitely am giving up some of that ceiling in terms of pass catching. But you're not going to have to pay for him as if he needs to hit his ceiling, right? He's going to be a guy you can have as your RB4 or 5, and you just hope he does like efficient Najee Harris kinds of things, right? Where like at the end of his time in Pittsburgh, Najee was not even a good pass catcher. Like he wasn't even getting, like, they didn't have a lot of goal line work to go around, frankly. So you're hoping you get a bunch of touches, a bunch of yards, and he lucks into some touchdowns. But when you're like drafting a 0 RB team, that is perfectly fine. And there's a little upside that this offense is just really good, and that maybe he does get some goal line work. I think he would be very good at that. So yeah, it's a limited ceiling bet, but I think it'll be more than priced in, that lack of ceiling.
Yeah, that's actually one thing I hadn't thought of. I'm glad you mentioned that.
J.K. Dobbins last year is actually probably the example I'm looking for, because Dobbins he was explosive early in the season, and the offense was actually good, where it wasn't ugly like Pittsburgh.
The Vikings create a lot of neutral and positive game script, and that last year helped Sam Darnold a lot. because it kept defenses off balance, and it helped their run game because it wasn't, teams were not able to just guess, okay, like we're going to pin our ears back. So I do think that can help if the Vikings can maintain that, and I think they can because they made a lot of defensive additions in free agency that might translate to an elite unit, and that kind of defense combined with a serviceable offense, depends on who they have at quarterback, of course. Aaron Rodgers lurks evermore. That can create this sort of game flow that is conducive to good and consistent running back production. All right, we're going to get to a quick word from your sponsor, which is us, before we go on to talk about Kareem Hunt and Stefon Diggs. Jordan Spieth and company faced one of the most difficult 3-hole stretches in all of golf this week. Catch the PGA's best battle the snake pit at the Valspar Championship live on NBC Golf Channel and streaming on Peacock. Kyle, I am going to say it is not pretty seeing these golfers be thrown into the snake pit. It's not for everyone, but most of them survive, so it's fine. I'm kidding, of course. This is just what they call that 3-hole stretch. And I was going to say, Jordan Spieth, he looks back. Okay, like I've been watching him a lot. He looks all the way back. He has a new weird swing routine, but he's outside the top 50 in strokes gained on the season. So he's not.
That's why you never watch the film. Just go to the spreadsheets, read the strokes gained. Don't watch the freaking film on. You're like, oh, well, by my eye, he looks good.
Yeah.
As soon as you check the numbers, he's not good.
No, right. The spreadsheet counteracted everything I've seen on the TV screen as usual. So anyway, check out the Valspar Open. I know I will. All right, let's get to the Chiefs backfield here. Kareem Hunt, nothing special last year, but man, Kansas City loved what they gave, what he gave their backfield with Isaiah Pacheco out. And then when Pacheco came back, they still liked what Hunt did and gave him a lot of high leverage touches in that offense. He's back with the Chiefs on a 1-year contract worth $1.5 million. I guess my question to start with, Kyle, could Kareem Hunt simply resume the role he had in this KC backfield in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, he's not good, but sure. They were fine letting him do it last year. He's 5th worst in rush yards over expected per carry. He was 11th worst, which is below average. It's not horrific in success rate. He's better in some other success metrics. Not, again, I wouldn't say good, but it sort of points to the lack of explosive plays, and you gain a little more consistently, although consistently a little bit below average, if not a lot below average. So I don't know. He's the classic ask for 3 yards, he'll give you 3. Ask for 4 yards, he'll give you 3 kind of guy. And I guess, yes, he could absolutely just stay in that steady Eddie kind of role he was in last year. But on the other hand, this is like as good as it can possibly get for Isaiah Pacheco. The worst thing you could see this team do from Pacheco's fantasy outlook is enter the draft with nothing in their backfield, right? With a 2nd-round pick penciled in for Quinshon Judkins or for Amarian Hampton, who's probably not even going in the 2nd round anymore, let alone late 2nd where the Chiefs would be picking. So the worst thing you could have is a situation in which a young, spry running back who can handle a lot of touches is there to just dust Pacheco. Yeah. Now he has the dustiest running back to compete with. If he gets back to form, his 2023 form, that's the type of player who can just relegate a 1-year, $1.5 million Kareem Hunt to a game day inactive, that specific version of Isaiah Pacheco. He was not that player last year, but he also broke his leg and came back from it quickly. So for Pacheco, this is as good as you can hope for, but it still means he needs to regain his form. He still has a lot of progress to make from the last time we saw him to the next time we see him.
I find it hard to talk about Isaiah Pacheco because we only got 2 games before his broken leg last year, or even less than, it was like 1.5 games. And then when he came back, he was rushed back. Either he rushed himself back or the team did. I don't know which, but he clearly was rushed back because he was not himself in any way when he came back, openly hobbling around the football field in the postseason. It made you think. So I will, I'm prefacing the numbers with saying that, but the numbers were really bleak for Pacheco last year, and I have some here. So Kareem Hunt, this is not going to shock you, Kyle, because like you said, he's just a guy. He's a reliable guy who seems to find a lot of favor with the Kansas City coaching staff. But last year, Kareem Hunt, 63rd out of 70 qualifying running backs in missed tackles forced per carry. Pacheco was 62nd, so not all that much better. Hunt was 58th in yards after contact per attempt. Pacheco was 63rd. Okay, so actually worse somehow. And Hunt had a higher rushing success rate than Pacheco, both in zone concepts and man gap concepts. Okay, so we're talking about a guy who was better. Like, he was better than Pacheco in many ways last year. Now Pacheco could be all the way back from that leg injury, and all this analysis could be for naught. I do understand that. Is the idea of Isaiah Pacheco as a top 15 running back, is that over with Kareem Hunt in the fold?
I mean, I guess it's not in the sense of, if he is, like I said, if he's the guy he was 2 or 3 years ago, then that guy can really just put Kareem Hunt out of the picture. And the same has to be said of like an Eli Mitchell. He could put an Eli Mitchell out of the picture too. Mm-hmm. Do I think he can get back to that form? And then the team also says that version of Pacheco still plays all the snaps over Hunt, that they still don't just do the frustrating thing. That parlay feels very unlikely to hit, because that's what needs to happen. He needs to get back to form. And then they still need to say that a back to form Pacheco deserves 15 to 18 touches per week, which isn't a guarantee. They might truly just say, we want the steady Eddie Kareem Hunt, no matter what Pacheco looks like. Or maybe Eli Mitchell comes in and is what he was in 2021 now. Yeah, something like that. So it's been a while, right? But maybe he is. Maybe he still has that in him, and it's always going to be a committee. So yeah, I mean, I think frankly, top 15 is so incredibly unlikely. Top 20 feels unlikely to, like, I think if you draft Pacheco, you'd be lucky to get RB3 production out of him. Like, that's sort of the hope with him. And I don't think that's how people are drafting it right now in early best ball.
No, yeah. And we're not going to know about his health status. I'm sure we'll get some kind of puff pieces on Pacheco. Like, I'm all the way back.
Shape of his life. Yeah.
I'm better than when my leg
playing in the slot.
Before my leg was broken. Right. Yes. Playing in the slot. Oh man.
Better before his broken.
So hard. Oh my goodness. Yeah. That's
like a player who truly has no business in the slot too, right?
No,
he's not like the Tony Pollard or whatever. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He's playing the slot.
I love the idea of Pacheco in the slot, just stomping his feet for 8 seconds, waiting to break open for Mahomes. Yeah. So you have Elijah Mitchell, as you call him, Eli. You know him personally. So
I do.
Elijah Mitchell, Kareem Hunt, and Isaiah Pacheco, potentially a total nightmare for fantasy purposes, especially in a Kansas City offense that, year in, year out, it varies a little bit, but it is among the league leaders in pass rate over expected. It is a team that doesn't mind doing the run game via dump offs to Travis Kelce and other short area targets, maybe Xavier Worthy once in a while. So that's going to be an ugly backfield for sure. We're going to stay in the AFC West here with the Raiders, who are reportedly, per ESPN, interested in Stefon Diggs, who remains unsigned, who has been silent. I mean, I've been looking endlessly online for a good cryptic post from our guy, Stefon Diggs, and I have not seen any. It makes me wonder, what's going on with that mercurial wide receiver we all know and love. So let's just say the Raiders do land him eventually, because we haven't heard him linked to any other teams. I mean, the Texans have made some noise about bringing him back, but they don't seem super into it.
They could have done it by now if they really wanted to,
right? And they got Christian Kirk. I'm guessing that ship has sailed. So say Diggs lands in Vegas, right? First of all, I think it makes a pretty good trio of pass catchers for Geno Smith, if he ever signs. By the way, he hasn't signed, has he?
Well, he's got one more year on the deal, which obviously he would play on anyways. But totally, there is a 4-year, $60 million or I don't know, $130 million contract coming for him, because Darnold got 30 something million. So he's got to get more than that. He's got to get 40, right? And it's like a 3-4 year deal. So it's coming. It's got to be coming.
By the way, I read that the talks between Geno and the Seattle front office were very brief. This is what I understand. And by that, I'm guessing they were very terse, and it was, get me out of here, man. I'm not playing here anymore. So tough times for the Seahawks, perhaps. I know that the Geno truthers are more in on Geno than ever before. I discovered that this weekend, unfortunately. But anyway, Diggs, if he lands in Vegas, is he even the wide receiver one over Jacoby Myers? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not entirely confident of that. The answer is probably yes. But I don't think this version of Diggs is capable of like really putting a dent in someone like Brock Bowers' target share, right? Last year, Diggs played more than he ever has. Ever, secondly, not true. It's more than he has since 2016 in the slot, the lowest ADOT of his career. He was moved to that underneath role, somewhat understandable given what Nico Collins and Tank Dell are capable of doing. He was all right in that role. 1.8 yards per route run is like Pat typically says 2 is a good benchmark for like, yeah, you just want to be above 2, right? It's not a steadfast rule. That's a good number to hit. And he was at 1.8 as well in the year before, the final year with the Bills, right? Where he started to really like he fell out of favor in the offense at the end of the season. So you've got a 2-year downward trend. Now he's coming off the torn ACL. Yeah. Maybe the one thing, I mean, there are a few things you can hang your hat on. Last year was top 10 in first downs per route run, which should track pretty closely with yards per route run, but to me, it says he's at least capable of moving the chains, right? He's probably not awfully explosive, but he can still win in that intermediate area. Thing is, they kind of have that guy already in Jacoby and kind of have that guy already again in Brock Bowers. Right. They still are lacking that true deep explosiveness, but Diggs can play basically half of his reps in the slot with Bowers getting something like the other half of those reps in the slot. Then Jacoby Myers mostly outside. He played mostly outside for the past 2 years as well. So it's a configuration that makes sense and it could be efficient. I just think that with Geno's arm, given that he is a good deep ball thrower, they're still missing that one guy. And you could say Trey Tucker. No, I'm not.
No, no. We're not doing that again. No, we're not pretending. You know, Antonio Pierce all last summer, the only player he could talk. He could be asked about anybody, a linebacker, a safety, whatever, and the conversation would circle all the way back to Trey Tucker, and Antonio Pierce would tell us, as you know, broken brain fantasy folks, Trey Tucker's my guy. Like he's gonna crush this year. And
we say all this now and cut to our first draft in like July when we're like, we're firing up a best ball draft for this show. And it's like 17th round. We're like, oh, Trey Tucker, that's a great stack with Geno.
Hey, 17th round doesn't count. Come on. But obviously, yes, I'm doing that. And they do not have a downfield threat because, like you said, Jacoby Myers, Diggs, Bowers, they all operate in similar areas. I will say, though, you know, before the injury, and that's a big caveat. I get that because we're talking about an aging receiver who is coming off an ACL. He was targeted. Stefon Diggs was targeted on 25% of his pass routes before the injury, and that's pretty strong. Now, that was with Tank Dell fading and or injured, and it was with Nico Collins out for a lot of that stretch. He was also, I mean, Diggs in PPR formats was a top 8 receiver before the injury. So he was getting it done. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't like what we're used to with Stefon Diggs, but he was getting it done in that pretty bad Houston passing attack. I feel like Diggs is a guy who is going to be largely dismissed if he signs with Vegas and who might be interesting, you know, later in drafts. And honestly, he might not be like ready to go for real until October or November, but maybe if you get him at a certain price point in redraft leagues, maybe that's okay.
Yeah, that's another thing too you have to consider is like, is he even going to play week 1? Do I have an IR spot? How deep is my bench? Which makes a player like Stefon Diggs a little more complicated, but also a little more interesting. He can fit better formats in different ways.
And I am falling in love as we talk about the idea of a Raider stack with Geno, Bowers, Diggs, and or Jacoby Myers. And you know, Jacoby Myers is the kind of guy who is also not exciting, but will just get it done. Like will just be productive. So we will see how that goes. Keep it locked to Rotoworld, obviously, throughout the off season as we update you on those situations. We're gonna do one more sponsor here, and then we're going to talk about Tet McMillan. This summer is your chance to catch the Premier League in the United States. Manchester United, Bournemouth, Everton, and West Ham take the pitch across the country. For more information and to purchase tickets, visit premierleague.com/summer series. Kyle, I practiced saying Bournemouth
those are pretty close.
And I just completely botched it. Unbelievable. I have never been more mad at myself.
It's like the first time that someone sees like FJ is in Fjord or
Yeah.
like Bjorn or something.
Yeah.
That's how you read it.
Bournemouth. So this is the equivalent of going to the driving range and just crushing your practice session. I mean, you're just puring every 6-iron, like right at the flag, every driver. And then you step up to the first tee
You're
and
like, oh, my hands are sweatier than I remember.
right. You step up to the tee and you're trembling a little and you're thinking 15 things. And then the goal becomes just get the ball airborne and the ball ends up in the water. So that's what happened there. Shout out to producer Adam, who I talked to about Bournemouth before the show. Oh, well. All right, let's get on to Arizona receiver Tet McMillan. He had his pro day because big time prospects don't do the combine anymore, unfortunately. He did the Arizona pro day. He ran a 40-yard dash. Here's what we know, Kyle. Tet McMillan ran a 40-yard dash. We don't know the time, except
Denny, how fast was it? But how fast was this?
There's a range. First of all, there's no video. I looked. There's no video. That's weird. He ran between a 4.48 and a 4.55. Is this correct?
That is, yeah, those are the numbers I've seen. The first report was that it was a 4.48, very kind number. And you're typically adding, people have different numbers they add to it, but like between 0.02 and 0.05 to pro day numbers, the stopwatch is a little more generous at the pro day. And so 4.48 on the low end, maybe you adjust that up, but then 4.55 on the high end, which does sound slow. And for NFL standards, it's kind of slow for a wide receiver. But one, we've seen plenty of receivers like Keenan Allen and DeAndre Hopkins go out with extremely slow 40s and be perfectly fine because their game isn't predicated on speed. And at Tet's lumbering size, you had it 6'4", 2 like teens or something like that. I remember at the combine. At that large size, even a 4.55 is like 60th percentile size adjusted speed. Like I said, you don't need to be an elite athlete, especially in one specific facet of your game. In totality, if you're a professional receiver who's at the top end of the game, you probably are an elite athlete. But you just don't need to be the fastest in a straight line without pads in Indy to be successful. And his game isn't predicated on that kind of speed. I think in this, I'm curious when I know what you're going to say. When I say he actually kind of reminds me of Marvin Harrison Jr., what does that strike you as? But I know what it strikes you as. Go ahead.
It strikes me as a lumbering large receiver who can't separate at all and is not exciting.
So here's the thing. So I believe he had 26% of his college targets were contested. That's a high number. It's nothing insane. It's not Quentin Johnston numbers. It is a relatively high number. He caught 45% of them. That's a good number. It's maybe not quite elite, but it puts him in an extremely similar range to Marvin Harrison, who had, I think, just a slightly lower contested target rate and a slightly higher contested catch rate, similar to Jamar Chase, similar to T. Higgins as well, which are all good comps, guys who won in college in that way, and then some of them translated it to the NFL. Marvin Harrison, TBD if he's translated it. Maybe. But it also does comp him to guys like Keon Coleman and Michael Wilson, who are just like true Z flanker types who are more there to distract the defense than they are to go out and dominate targets. And now we're seeing his draft stock falling a little bit too. Both Mel Kiper, Daniel Jeremiah had him in the 20s, low 20s, albeit, but in the 20s, whereas like, I think my last mock draft, I had him to the Panthers at 8, or maybe that was the first mock draft. And I still kind of think he'll go top 10, but I'm less confident in that now. And then when you're telling me he's a guy who goes in the 20s, he's got these minor red flags, it definitely starts to widen the range of outcomes to what you called the lumbering non-separation types.
Yeah. And I do feel like those types are not necessarily custom made for the modern NFL. I know we talked on the show with Pat a lot about that, about like how it seems like in the future every receiver will be 5'11" and 175 pounds. There is a role for a guy like McMillan. I do think landing spot matters a lot, and I know ESPN's Mel Kiper mocked him to Denver with the 20th pick. He published that on Tuesday morning, so I think that's up to date. I will say though, to me, it strikes me as kind of redundant in a way if you have Courtland Sutton. So you're going to have two big-bodied outside receivers, I guess Marvin Mims in the slot, and then Evan Ingram in the mix. I think altogether that's fine. But I just feel like McMillan is maybe not the greatest fit for the Broncos. What do you think?
I mean, I could see it now. What Cortland Sutton's got to be 30 or 31 years old right now. You're thinking that, well, he's maybe best fit as he closes out his career, right? Whether it be 2 years or 6 years, probably not a true number one receiver. I don't know if he ever truly was the dominant number one receiver. Those players can be like T. Higgins. He could be a number one receiver on another team. Right. Let's not find out. And that would be potentially the role you hope that he grows into, essentially, as he downscales his target share and Tet McMillan upscales. And like you said, they have the underneath guys. They're just not Cortland Sutton, right? It's maybe Troy Franklin you could add to that mix. Hopefully the running backs going forward. And then obviously Evan Ingram, Marvin Mims. So I think that makes sense in that he's a good talent at a premium position. And maybe you just hope he is just that good. Like truly, if you had a Jamar Chase type player and you were on the board and Jamar Chase was there, you wouldn't be like, can't have 2 Jamar Chases on my team. This role's a little less valuable, right? Yeah. The boundary contested target guy. But if they're both very good at it, and Sutton is good at it, you maybe don't care so much. And I still think he's the best wide receiver in this class, aside from Travis Hunter, which is a whole different can of worms on his position. So I think that would be fine in terms of his fantasy outlook. Yeah, maybe not the best for week one. Another one that we talked about earlier was the Raiders. If they don't get Diggs, Tet can actually be that deep guy. He actually maybe has a little bit like DK Metcalf too, where he doesn't have the horizontal wiggle so much as other guys, but he can just win balls on the outside deep downfield, which Metcalf did really well with Geno. So maybe like Tet McMillan obviously be a top 10 pick. I think it'd be 6. Maybe there's a fit there too.
By the way, Horizontal Wiggle, the name of my band in college. So I appreciate you shouting us out like that. I have to say, though, about McMillan, I was looking into his college numbers. Obviously, crazy production over the past 2 seasons. He followed up a 90-catch, 1,400-yard, 10-touchdown campaign in 2023 with an 84-catch, 1,308 touchdown season in 2024. I was looking at his efficiency numbers, though, Kyle, and some questions. He was 18th in yards per route run in 2024. That's good. 2023, he was 35th among all college receivers in yards per route run. Of course, this was with a cutoff on Pro Football Focus. So it wasn't all, but it was a lot. It was hundreds of them. 34th. Are we sure that this guy is a first round pick? I mean, this receiver class seems to be lacking.
Yes, I think that's correct. I think there's a lot of guys who should go in the 20s.
And so are we, as a draft, is the draft community and our teams themselves, our front offices in the NFL, being like, well, one of these guys has got to be good? It's probably this guy. I mean, are we forcing the issue here with Tet McMillan?
I would say the fact that Kuiper and Daniel Jeremiah both dropped him into the 20s, low 20s, maybe says that drafting him in the top 10 would be forcing the issue, right? Because now that we're getting this sort of, like, he may not even be the wide receiver one of this class. Like, some people are saying, like, Matthew Golden should be over him. So maybe the fact that now we're seeing the draft stock declining a little bit, I still think he's a lock to go in the first round, but maybe the fact that we're seeing his draft stock declining to where the 20s seems reasonable is a sort of pullback on the idea that he is this top 10 worthy pick at wide receiver. I still think that on the whole, the contested stuff isn't so drastic. Like I said, it's not in the Quentin Johnston range of like glaring red flags. And a lot of the times the guys who are as contested target heavy as Marvin Harrison, Jamar Chase, and Tet, if it's a concern, they end up going in the second or third. And guys who are contested heavy in the third round, you're like, oh, we actually didn't knock you enough for this. And they end up like, it's like Terrace Marshall types, right? Where like, when you're that contested and the NFL thinks your production should be discounted, we should really discount it. So maybe the idea that he should go in the 20s is right. I would still both bet on him being a first round pick and think he should be a first round pick.
Gotcha. I could see him falling a little more, honestly. I know that I felt like there was a lot of cope online today about his 40 numbers. And it's not that the 40 numbers were bad. I will say Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer said that sources that timed McMillan's 40 had him as high as 4.58. And that was a little concerning. I mean, we're talking about 0.3 of a second. So maybe it doesn't mean anything, but I felt a little copish about the reaction to McMillan's pro day. We'll see how that goes. Now, we were going to end the show with a discussion, a full discussion about Caleb Williams and the Bears' vastly improved offensive line. They've made a lot of signings, done a lot of deals. to improve that offensive line this month. We're going to save that for Thursday's show with me, Kyle, and Pat Daugherty will be back from Disney World. He will be here to give us a full report on how much he loves Disney World. So we'll save Caleb for Thursday. Kyle, what do you have on the site right now? I know you have the Cooper Kupp piece to Seattle. Anything else?
I'm going to publish something on the rookie class. I don't know which one I want to do first. I have my wide receiver rankings and breakdowns done, and I have my tight ends done. Maybe I'll start with wide receivers. Hit us up in the comments. Like and subscribe, and hit us up in the comments because I have it all done. I just don't know what order I want to publish it in yet.
Yes, you have to like and subscribe. Not one or the other. We want both. Thank you for joining us today. We will see you on Thursday.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.